Last year, Games Workshop deleted my entire army, stopping me from playing the new edition of the Warhammer Battle strategy game completely. This means that we're going to need to start a new army from nothing. So first we need to pick the new army. Won't be this one because it doesn't exist anymore. Then we're going to need to build it, paint it all from scratch. And then I thought it would be fun if I try my luck in a local tournament to see how the army does. But starting today, we're going to be making a new, cheap Warhammer army. I know what you're thinking. You've never heard the words Warhammer and cheap in the same sentence.
Can that even be done, or is this man just a dirty liar?
So I've saved up all 500,000 views of my YouTube channel revenue. And with that, we're going to create an army so powerful that not even Games Workshop can destroy it. But there's a problem. I've moved country, which means not only do I need to build an army entirely from scratch, but I also need to rebuy all of my hobby supplies again. What army are we going to pick first? Well, Games Workshop has created several Lord of the Rings starter sets, known as battle hosts. And each set has over 30 miniatures for just £57. That's less than £2 a miniature, so it's actually a good deal, especially considering that you can get all of these different army boxes for just £45 each when you pick them up from a discounted store like the one linked below. But how are we going to decide which army to pick? There's 4 army boxes to choose from, and I want to start with one of these because it includes a whole army which you can just start playing the game with. So this is option 1, the Isengard Battle Host, which includes 24 Uruk-Hai scouts, the ones we see running after the Fellowship, and also 20 Uruk-Hai warriors like the ones from Helm's Deep. And by the way, that's the only set to ever outsell the Space Marine. And we also get both Wormtongue and Saruman, and he can cast magical spells. This is truly an army bred for one purpose: to destroy the race of men. And in total, it gives us 46 miniatures. So that's about £1 per miniature, or $2 if you're American. It's unheard of, and surely it's only a matter of time before Games Workshop increase the price. Option 2 is the Rohan Battle Host, but I need to warn you about this one, because this set actually has the old Rohan foot troops and horses. And interestingly, Games Workshop doesn't sell it directly on their website anymore. You can still find a few out in the wild, but it's specifically been removed from their website, and we do know that they haven't finished releasing all of the miniatures for the war in Rohan. So it's extremely likely that we're going to get new Rohan horse-mounted soldiers, along with the new Rohan soldiers. So if you want to collect Rohan, I would just wait for that new set. That brings me on to option 3, which is Minas Tirith. Now this includes 24 warriors, 6 mounted knights, a fool of a took, and Gandalf. And this is probably one of the most diverse armies in the game, with so many other options that you can add on to it later. However, now we have option 4, the Mordor Battle Host, the epitome of evil, which includes 24 Mordor orcs, 6 wargs, and the Witch King himself. That's 32 miniatures in total, worth about £1.50 each. So which army am I going to be starting? Well, the decision is quite simple, my friend. Since no man can kill the Witch King, he therefore cannot be cancelled by Games Workshop. So collecting this army in particular is kind of like collecting Ultramarines. Now, just to give you an idea of the actual savings from this box set, if you were to buy everything separately, here's what it's going to cost you. Firstly, you've got the Witch King, the new character model. He's $35 on his own. The Mordor Orcs are $52. And the Warg Riders, well, they're $45 just for 6 of them. So that would be $132 in total, or if you're in the UK, it would be £83 in total. So that means we're almost getting all of this stuff for almost half price by picking it up from one of our affiliate stores from the link below. So here it is, the Mordor Battle Host. This is going to be the start of our new army. But some of you watching are going to be quite surprised by what's inside. When you look closely at the sprue, the first thing you're going to notice is that all of these orcs and most of the miniatures that were made at this time come as single pieces. So you don't even need to build the miniatures, they're just complete just cut them out of the sprue and they're ready to go. But because of this kind of molding technique, if you look at them from the side, you'll see that they're actually rather 2D looking. They look quite flat, and that's because of the molding technique they've used. In fact, most of the miniatures in this box were originally handcrafted on the set of The Lord of the Rings back in 1999. And then these miniatures were released in 2001. So they're almost 24 years old. So now let's find out how well they've stood up against the test of time. Now, one of the things you're going to notice with the older miniature sprues is the fact that each one has duplicates. So there's 12 orcs on this sprue, and then there's another 12 orcs on this sprue. And as you can see, each sprue is just exactly the same. So that means every 12 orcs you get are actually just duplicates of one another. So especially when you have a horde army, it's really important that you make each one of these look a bit different. Otherwise, you just got like 4 duplicates running across the table, which starts to kind of ruin your immersion.
If you compare that to the more recently made Witch King, which comes in the same box set, well, this was actually created with 3D modeling software, and it's just lots of bits on the sprue, and it's quite hard to actually figure out what would go where when you're building it. But this allows the designers to break up the design, be very efficient with the sprue space, and then when you actually put it together, you get a much more exciting 3-dimensional model. And I think this box set really shows the contrast as to how far Games Workshop has progressed as a miniature company. On the one hand, we have these 2D orcs versus the stunningly animated Witch King. And now we've unboxed everything, we can start step 2, the build phase. Now, to actually get started with building the battle host, we must first buy a few more items. The clippers for cutting them out, which costs $10. PVA glue, which we'll need later, and files for removing the horrendous mold lines, and then plastic glue for sticking them together. Now, this was the part I realized that quite a lot of work had to be done on these. We've got to remove all of the mold lines around the 2001 miniatures. Now, the mold lines are hidden relatively well around the sort of sides of the miniature, and normally you're looking at the front or back and not the side, so they're quite well hidden. But if you look closely, they are very visible. So I think most people would definitely want to get a file or a knife and start removing all of the mold lines just to clean them up. Now, obviously, most of the orcs don't even require building, apart from the spearmen, who come in 2 parts. So you just got to cut out their arms and spear and then glue them straight into the front. In fact, they don't even require glue. You could just push them in. And that immediately gives them more of a 3D look. And can I just say how easy these are to put together, especially compared to some of Games Workshop's more recent sculpts. Like, the fact that there's no instructions in the box to put these orcs together just shows how intuitive it is and how approachable it is if you're new to the hobby. Because most people who watch the movies pretty much had no experience with building miniatures or gluing them together. So this is perfect. It really understood the audience that it was for. And in my opinion, anything that can remove the barrier to entry into Warhammer or the Middle-earth strategy game is so important. But for better or worse, this is not how Games Workshop make their newer miniatures. Times have definitely moved on, but holding these really reminds me of how much more approachable the hobby was back then. Now, the next thing you're going to notice is that all of these bases have slots in. And all of these miniatures, as you can see, because their feet are all attached to kind of like a little plastic bar, you just slot them in the bases and that's it. Again, you don't even need to glue them in, because otherwise when you move them, you like lift them out of their bases. And that was actually my gaming experience when I was younger, because I couldn't afford like the glue, so I'd buy the miniatures and then I'd be like, okay, now I'm moving around the tabletop like this. I think it does look pretty boring if you have all of your miniatures just standing on flat bases. So now we're going to do something to fix that. So I brought some reptile bark for $15, and you can also find this in the woods as well. I'd not recommend using actual rocks though, because they're quite heavy. I also got some AK Interactive Dark Earth texture, which was $17. It's basically sand, paint, and PVA glue though, so you can easily make that yourself for free. And we'll need some milliput or green stuff for $10. And then I got some PVA glue, which I obviously already mentioned earlier. And you can find all these resources below if you want to check them out for yourself. But next we're going to cut up some of that reptile bark and just kind of crack it in half. It's very dry and easy to do this. And then we're just going to fit it onto the bases and place it without gluing it first, just to cover up the slots that are in the bases. We also want to have a wide enough area that the miniature will be able to stand on the area above that we're creating. I also then sealed in the wood with some watered down PVA glue. You can also do this by spray painting later, but doing it now just makes the wood solid on the outside. Then I use the AK Interactive Texture Paint, which is essentially just brown sand and PVA with a bit of brown paint. So you can make that yourself for free, but it's much easier for me to buy it. I then applied that around the wooden bark so it kind of looked like a rock coming out of the ground. Turf was kind of mound up around it. I also then applied the AK Interactive Texture Paste to some of the flat models just so we have some guys who are just standing more on like a battlefield or something. And using that paste you can also kind of fill in the gaps around those plastic slots because there's always gaps on the ends. They never seem to fit perfectly. Do make sure to be careful though that you don't cover their feet with any of the mud texture. It looks really bad if your models are just drowning in the stuff. Those keen-eyed viewers among you may have also noticed that I'm using a file to apply this stuff. I don't recommend it. I recommend using like a stick or something else, but it was all I had around because I'm literally starting again from scratch. So I didn't even have the proper tools to apply it to the miniatures. Now, to apply those orc models onto the bases we made earlier, we're going to need to cut the base slots off the orcs themselves. And then you can just sand down their feet so it's completely flat. And then we can just super glue them onto the rocky surface that we created earlier. I dry fit them first and then super glued them into position, adding on a bit more ground texture so it kind of looked like the orc is settled in the environment or that he's left some muddy footprints. Having the orcs at a slight angle kind of makes them look a bit more dynamic as well. The next thing you'll notice about these older sculpts is the fact that there's a few gaps in some of the joints. So we can use some milliputs or some green stuff to fill in those gaps. And again, I'm using my file here to kind of create like some fur over his shoulder just to make it look a bit more diverse and again break up the duplicates of all the sculpts we have here.
So we've now finished preparing all of the orcs. There are 24 of them, which is quite a lot, but we'll probably need more for the final army. Next though, we're going to need to start building the Wild Warg Riders, which is a very interesting set.
One of Games Workshop's most surprising kits is the 2002 Warg Riders. This is one of the few kits that they actually designed for gameplay. You see, in the Lord of the Rings rules, the rider can actually get dismounted from the warg, or even die separately to its mount. And so they designed the wargs with detachable riders. But when you take him off, obviously it leaves a hole in the warg. But they even made a replacement bit of warg fur for you to replace onto its back to cover up the hole. So you get a whole seamless warg model. It's one of the few kits designed with actual gameplay in mind. Now this set also comes with 2 bowmen, 2 shieldmen, and 2 throwing spear guys that you can also glue on the extra shields you get in the box. There's also some bows there, so if you want you can kind of customize them by cutting bits off and turning the wargs into bowmen. But ideally I would rather have them all as shield and spearmen because that's just the best way to run them. But the one thing that really lets these particular sculpts down is the massive joining line around the warg's neck. And also they have like this really flat back that just doesn't look like a natural animal. So I'm going to be mixing up some more milliputs, or you can use green stuff, so we can address that problem. And what we're going to do is we're going to start sculpting some fur by just putting a big batch of milliput on its back here, and then slowly we'll just start drawing it out in like a fur-like pattern to create a bit more of a hump back to the warg that just looks more natural, kind of like how they did in the movies. And sculpting the fur onto the warg is pretty easy. I mean, to sculpt fur, you kind of just use your sculpting tool to drag little lines across it that look a bit like fur. Obviously though, we still want the rider's hole that the rider's going to sit in exposed. And I'm also going to check that the rider can actually sit in that crack and just mold the milliput around him so it actually looks like he's really sitting on the warg's back and moving its fur around him. And also the seam on the side of its neck, we're just going to fill that in with milliput. And again, we're going to craft some little bits of fur on the side there to make it look natural, like that gap was never there. And now if you look at these wargs, they look massively better. They look like one complete piece of plastic. Obviously though, once we paint them, you won't even be able to tell that any work was done to them.
So now we've finished these and our Wild Warg Riders, we need to have a hero to lead our army. And I saved the best till last.
Now the last miniature in the Mordor battle host that we need to build is the Witch King. And he is the only miniature that comes with instructions. And all the parts on his sprue are actually numbered. So these instructions tell you, okay, put number 5 in this bit and glue number 6 to this bit, sort of thing. So it's very, very easy to follow, but by comparison to those earlier models that we built, it's not intuitive, is it? Like, not many people can sit down and just sort of put this together without the instructions. Now, I'm normally the kind of person who does this without instructions, but there was this one time that I accidentally glued on something too early, which then screwed up the miniature because I couldn't glue on something else that was meant to go on before that. So I've since learned to follow instructions. And interestingly, you can build the Witch King as the Witch King or a Ring Wraith. Now, I think if I do buy another battle host set for Mordor in the future, I might actually do the Ring Wraith version and then customize like a different pose or something. But for now, if you're playing this as an army, like, you're gonna want the Witch King. He's so powerful. And the Ring Wraiths are actually pretty bad now, unfortunately. But the unmounted version of the Witch King has the biggest mace I've ever seen, and it looks so cool and detailed. I love it. It's very spiky. So I filled in the mold lines in places, but they're mostly hidden by the cloak's seams. I think that's another thing that Games Workshop design team do a lot better now. They do hide a lot of the mold lines where the connections are. So it's very, very clever and advanced. But still, if you want this miniature to look good, and especially if you're using contrast paints, make sure you spend the time to remove those mold lines. And I love the pose on this model. It kind of looks like he's pointing a sword at his next enemy or potentially commanding his army to move forward. I do like to make the extra effort when creating a character model's base because I think it really tells a story of what that character is doing at that time. So I cut up some tree bark and I positioned it just under the miniature, kind of pointing upwards, so it follows the angle of the horse sort of rearing up. And now it gives the impression that the Witch King is on top of a cliff, sending his forces into battle from above.
So in total, for under $200, we have now built and prepared the Mordor battle host. And it is ready for painting. But we're not going to be painting it like the box art. Oh no, no, no. I've created a impactful movie themed paint scheme, which you can check out in the next video right here. And if you want an early look at our progress shots and behind the scenes, don't forget to join the emailing list linked below.